Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds. And in today's video topic, it's going to be more of a discussional topic this time around. So, I have been seeing a lot of stuff around the community, specifically the Discord, the YouTube comments, the Reddit, just everywhere, obviously. Uh, Mainly it's about multiplayer, right? Well, a lot of people are waiting on multiplayer. I know a lot of people that are waiting for multiplayer so that they can play with their friends and have fun with the game. And to be honest, I actually don't really care about multiplayer that much. Like, don't get me wrong, that the idea of being able to, trade and play with other people and like play as in like an aura body kind of character where you like support someone else and stuff like that or be a carry. That sounds cool and all. Like, don't get me wrong, but I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I was very sheltered and I was like living in a cabin in the middle of the woods. And I had gotten really used to, the lonely kind of, being by myself kind of thing. So I really sucked at multiplayer kind of games. Like, I really do not like working with others in a lot of situations. So I use ARPGs to get away from people. So I don't necessarily want to, try to find people to play with. So that's why I'm not really into multiplayer that much. But others are, and I understand that completely. And you must be wondering, Dread, well, if you don't like multiplayer, but it's coming. Like, what's the problem? Well, I want multiplayer to come eventually. Don't get me wrong. I think it will, be healthy for the game and such. The problem is it's been a little bit toxic of late. Now, a lot of people throw that word around toxic, and I mean it in the lightest sense of the word. It's more of just this kind of mentality that like this like game developers don't actually work hard and stuff, because I know a lot of game developers, a lot of them are my friends. They work really hard on these kind of things. Obviously, like there's some scummy ones, but specifically I know the ones working at Last Epoch. I've had a few conversations with a few of them, and I know them to be good people. So I completely respect their decision in taking their time with multiplayer, especially because multiplayer is not easy. To make multiplayer work, it is not easy whatsoever. Like, let's get that straight. It is not an easy endeavor to work on peer to peer connections, right? It is not easy whatsoever, and there are plenty of other games that fail completely at it. For a few examples, right, of games that failed in terms of multiplayer peer to peer connection, right? We obviously talked about the red herring in the room, Wilson. Wilson literally died because its multiplayer was actual hot garbage, among a lot of other things. My friend Tenki has a huge video about Wilson and its problems, which I'll link in the description. But pretty much, multiplayer was one of the biggest problems with that game because they did not take the time to build it properly. And then, of course, another game that comes to mind is Path of Exile. Now, don't get me wrong, Path of Exile multiplayer now is like a lot better than it used to be back in the day. And just playing on a server in Path of Exile back in the day was sometimes precarious due to just a lot of like the connection issues, right? And you got to remember, when you're playing on a server, it doesn't matter if you're playing multiplayer or not with other people, it will still affect you because you have to connect to the server. So even if you don't play with other people, multiplayer will still affect you, even if you're solo by yourself, because you will still be on a server and you'll still have to deal with all that, with all the connection issues. So, multiplayer affects everyone who wants to play the game. So, that's why it's a very important thing to get right. Uh, Now, there's a lot of other games that didn't necessarily do multiplayer wrong, obviously, but like they just rushed the game. And another example is like Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk was going to be like one of the best games ever, at least like everyone was hyped up for it, right? Well, it ended up being, obviously a piece of trash, because not because like the game developers didn't care. Like, the game developers made stuff like, like CD Projekt Red has made stuff like The Witcher and stuff like that. And they're really good games. I've played a few of them already and I really like them. But they were rushed, obviously. They had multiple, like, the problem was they had to restart their project multiple times because multiple different visions. And then when they finally had something working and viable and they showed it off at E3, they had a kernel of a game and they didn't have enough time to finish it and polish it. Well, the same thing works with multiplayer. Multiplayer just doesn't just work right out of the gate. There's constant problems, bugs, issues. Like even to this day, like Path of Exile still has problems with connectivity issues. Path of Exile still has problems with duping. Like recently, I remember a few leagues back that they had to roll back some stuff because of duping. It happens. It's all the time. Multiplayer isn't just this like thing that is finished and then you're done with. It is a problem that continues and will keep continuing to be a problem. Now, they are doing their due diligence by taking their time, and I will not stand for them being obviously harassed over their choice to actually take their time, because I think that's the healthy decision. Now, to talk about the other camp real quick. Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe that multiplayer should eventually be released, like in a decent amount of time. They are technically done with multiplayer. They're very close with it being done, and they're very close to actually start testing it with a larger group, i.e., like the community testers. And the faster they get it to the people who are actually playing the game like us, yada yada yada, right? It will make it so that they can work on it faster and get it ready for launch, because obviously when you have 10 people on the same peer-to-peer server, it's not the same as having 10,000 people, and there will be different bugs involved and stuff like that. So ripping off the band-aid as soon as possible is a very good idea, especially in a beta like this where you have the time to do so, because there are plenty of people that don't don't like want to play the game till it's like fully released. The problem is though, there's this mentality that multiplayer is going to make the game better. Now, don't get me wrong, multiplayer will be very good for the game, but it isn't that kind of thing that's just going to make the game better. Like when if like multiplayer was implemented tomorrow and I logged in and I played multiplayer, it's not going to like fix the game. Like if there's like an underlying issue with skill balance and stuff like that, it's not going to fix the game. If anything, it's actually going to make skill balance even worse, because not only do you have to worry about a character in a solo environment, now you have to worry about a character in a multiplayer environment, like having like 5 different poison rogues, like poison flurry rogues on the same target, because poison is global and affects everybody and not just you. So if you have 5 different characters applying poison, you'll get 5 times the amount of, well, you'll get even more than that because of the exponential power of poison. That obviously is very, very problematic. So those are the kind of things that they're going to have to fix as well. Not only just peer-to-peer stuff, they have to deal with the balance as well. That's a large majority of it. So that's why we definitely want to get it out as fast as possible. But at the same time, what's going to happen is if they release multiplayer and it's absolute dog shit mess, like, of course, Wilson, or, obviously, we keep beating on it, but it's the perfect example. If it's an absolute hot mess, people are going to be like, oh, I'm playing multiplayer and the game's trash, like 1 star, and that's going to be a large majority of people, even though the game is absolutely wonderful as I'm playing it right now, or, in the video. Like the game is wonderful and has been amazing so far. Even in a beta state, it is very close to what I would call a finished game. With the 2 new endgame systems coming in patch 8.5, it will be much closer. But like I said, multiplayer coming in isn't going to fix the game. It's not going to, like, obviously change everything. It's not going to make the game better all of a sudden. It is going to push the game further in terms of the release schedule, but it's not just going to like fix all of its problems or make the game better. So that is kind of why I'm bringing up this fact, is like people expect it to, I like hampering down people's expectations is a good idea early on in development like this, because if you let expectations rise too much, you get a cyberpunk situation where everybody wants to have this game that does literally everything, and then you end up with what cyberpunk is. Now, cyberpunk has had a few patches, so it's a lot better, but I would rather Last Epoch be finished on release than, be half finished and then added on later. I would rather that be preferable. And like people, like it's a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, like all these other games do really well with multiplayer, yada yada yada, like it's easy. Yeah, when you work at multiplayer from the start, you got to remember These guys, they started in a Kickstarter, they started in a garage somewhere. They did not think that they're, the devs from 3 to 4 years ago, like, well, the devs, they did not have the same thoughts that they have now. They did not have the same ambitions that they had now. Back in the day, they didn't think that this was going to go up, probably. Like, obviously they had their hopes and dreams, but they didn't think that it was probably going to get anywhere near what it is now. They didn't think that it was going to actually become popular and actually become a competitor in the ARPG market. So they probably were not thinking about multiplayer at the time and did not have the proper, resources to implement multiplayer at the time. So you can't really blame them for not just doing it at the start. Like I said, this game was kind of spawned out of just a niche in the market that existed that was not being fulfilled because, obviously Grim Dawn is getting a little old. Wilson was trash. There's been plenty of RPGs that just kind of missed the mark. So this game spontaneously came out of nowhere. So it's not like as if, oh, like, they've been planning this from the start. A lot of these changes they've been making have been spontaneous, and it's because they've changed their ideology a lot. Like, for instance, the bazaar, the thing where the trading, like the thing that had the website, they're not doing the bazaar anymore because they realize that that does not fit with their new ideology for the game. Because guess what? People change and their ideologies change. Like, people, like the developers are allowed to change the game how they see fit. If they see that the bazaar specifically is not good for the game, then they should obviously change it, right? They shouldn't go with it just because it was written on somewhere. They should change it to be healthy for the game, because I would rather have a fun and healthy game than a game that was like 100% of my promises. Now, obviously, if you break all the promises in the Kickstarter video and all that kind of stuff, you end up with Wilson or Project Umbra, if you guys remember from that time. But that's what happens when you like break everything. But like there's a rhyme and a reason for when a game changes its ideologies on something. Like, for instance, the longest amount of time, protections was the thing. Like, for instance, back in the day, you used to have protections, which is a completely different system than the resistance system right now. But after a long time of trying to balance it and just not working, they realized that, yeah, we could make this system work, but we also realized that it would be much easier if we just use the tried and true method of the resistance system, give ourselves a little bit of a spin on it, and then like move on, because it saved them so much time. Like, if protections were still in the game, they would still be balancing protections, because protections are a really cool system and they're pulled off in other games. But it's not an easy system to fix. So obviously they're not going to spend all this development time trying to fix it when they could, spend more development time on more important things like, i.e., multiplayer. So it is okay for them to change their ideas. It is okay for them to change, when they're going to move the date of the game. But like I said, I also do agree that multiplayer does need to eventually come out, because the game is getting to the point where a lot of people, like I said, are just waiting for multiplayer to play the game, even though multiplayer won't really do anything. It's just more of a ideological thing, because there's a large amount of people that are waiting. So obviously you're going to join those people waiting, because a lot of these people, they play RPGs not only because they want to have a solo experience, but they want to have a solo experience with others, if that makes sense. And obviously, Last Epoch isn't like the biggest game ever, so that means, they don't want to play until the whole populace is around, right? So that's understandable, completely understandable. Like, if you want to wait to play until multiplayer, if you want to wait to play until release, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, like, you're gonna have to wait, but that's the problem, is the people that don't want to play right now, but then they also want multiplayer now. It's like, well, help us test the game, help us give feedback to the developers. This is a community driven thing. Sure, I give them flack sometimes about not listening to specific kernels of details, like how broken stun is currently in the current meta, but that doesn't mean that they don't listen to feedback. Like, if there's a large majority of people not enjoying a mechanic or something, they will change it, and they have in the past. So, like I said, TLDR of the whole video is multiplayer should not be rushed, but it should not also take 4 years. Obviously, they're almost already done with multiplayer, so it's not going to be very long. Like, it's going to be in testers' hands before the next few months here. And then, of course, the release of multiplayer will be out much sooner than probably a lot of you expect. So yeah, with all that being said, this has been Dread from Epic Builds. Try to, be a lot nicer to these guys. They're working really hard. Bye.